Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast presented by Prize Picks. I'm your host, Samantha Previte. On today's episode of 21 Questions, I am so happy to be joined by the one and only Andy Behrens, analyst, personality, thought leader at Yahoo Fantasy, who you can find on Twitter at Andy Behrens. Welcome to the Fantasy Flex, Andy. How was your week 6?
Oh, it was pretty good. It was pretty good in part because there's like a gap in my week 6 where I actually went to the WNBA finals and I didn't have to watch the end of the Bears Packers game. So I feel like that made it better.
Oof, I'm so sorry. That was definitely a tough game. Did you end up watching the end of it, or did you see the Aaron Rodgers "I own you" stuff?
Yeah, well, first of all, like I spent part of the first half of like a finals game. Like there are no, like, Chicago teams don't win titles and they certainly don't win them at home. So I should have been just like fully engaged. But part of the first half, I still had my phone out and I'm watching the Bears and Packers and I had it recorded at home. So I've witnessed the whole thing now. It went, it doesn't even crack the list. I'm a Bears fan, obviously. It doesn't even crack the list of the, I don't know, 15, 20 most gutting, horrible Bears losses to the Packers during the history of my fandom. So I don't know. I'm just kind of shrugging this one off. Like it didn't even bother me for Rodgers to say what he said, because of course he's right. Like, way to state the obvious in the end zone. I get it. You own us.
Fair enough. How did your fantasy weeks go? How many leagues are you in, by the way? Not a part of the 21 questions. Just curious.
Oh yeah, this always feels like, it sounds like a lot, but so I'm in 24 leagues, not counting like the best ball leagues and things like that. But it's football, so it's not, this isn't like being in 24 daily transaction baseball leagues or 24 daily transaction hoops leagues, where like you legitimately have to be awake until the end of the West Coast games and things like that. You can make transactions every, like, it's football, so you can, like, if there are leagues where you want to check in 3 times a week, that's fine, you can do it and you can be successful. So I don't, like, it's not that bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in like 6 leagues, which feels like a lot, but it's actually not that much. I know I feel like everyone else is in a million more leagues, but I don't want to like get caught up in that, because I know there are people that do like 100 leagues or something like that. So I certainly can't keep up with you guys. I'm very impressed with your 24 leagues.
Well, what does start to happen, and I kind of wish I could pare it down a little bit, because by the end of draft season, you start drafting players just because you don't have them in other leagues, which is not a valid reason to draft a guy, right? Like,
fair enough. Yeah.
However, I made some good decisions that way too. Like, I don't know. I remember taking Austin Eckler toward the end of draft season, because I was like, I'm a little light on Eckler. But you shouldn't think of it as a portfolio. You should walk away with the guys that you like, period, whoever they are. I feel like I didn't do a lot of that this year. But in any case, even when you're in, I could be in 50 leagues and there's still like a half dozen that I'm really locked in on, where it's like childhood friends or college friends or, coworkers. And it's maybe some leagues that are highly incentivized, right? So I'm really locked in on those things, and everything else is a bit of a distraction.
I love, my background is cool that it was very non-traditional, that is there really a traditional way to get into this space? But I didn't grow up a really big sports fan. I didn't grow up a football fan for sure. And I don't want to stereotype, but like being a woman, I feel like you have fewer options to be in like home leagues and like leagues with friends, because I genuinely don't have any like real girlfriends that play fantasy. I'm trying to evangelize them. I will get them there. But so like I don't have as many of those like cool leagues that a lot of people have attachment to, or do like the home draft in person all the time. So certainly is something that I'm very jealous of when other people talk about them, and like the cool traditions and everything like that, I really, really miss out on.
Yeah, there's something about the leagues that used to draft. I'm in just a handful of these leagues now that are like 20 plus years old, where like I'm ancient, so of course I am. But like, we used to draft live, and we used to draft before all of fantasy was on the internet, right? So you used to get like a packet of papers each week from the commissioner of the league, that basically detailed all the stats. And sometimes a commissioner, I was like this myself, sometimes a commissioner would get really into it and like preview the upcoming matchups, and it was just like receiving a magazine every Friday that was like your little primer on the week ahead. And there's just something about the leagues that used to be on, printed paper, and you'd use the company photocopier to fire everything off and distribute via interoffice mail. And there's just something about those leagues that I'm super attached to. And I'm in a couple that aren't even for a lot of money. Like I don't think the league fee has changed in 20 years, and it doesn't matter. I'm just like, I want to beat those guys. They want to beat me. Those are the leagues that I think I have the greatest emotional investment in.
That is so wholesome. Well, that kind of brings us into our first couple questions. What year
behind the scenes, it's really not that wholesome.
I want to believe it's wholesome, but what year did you start playing fantasy? I know you said 20-ish years, and did you win your first league?
Oh, well, this is, within my own fantasy journey, this is a bit of an interesting story. It's probably 92 or 93. I was in a work league at my, I was an English major in college, always wanted to get into sports writing, had a little toe in sports writing, but this is a time, early 90s where you just I couldn't anyway. I couldn't make any money as a writer. Like I was a, stringer for some local papers, and I wrote for this trade publication that was a kind of a nightmare. And like, there was just no money to be made in writing. So I took a corporate job and immediately fell into a fantasy football league. Right. And I was good at it and I liked it. And I was a huge sports fan, but my first 4 seasons playing in that league, I made the finals each year and I lost each year. And I would lose in just like crushing and just probabilistically almost impossible fashion. Like the first year I just had an enormous lead going into the final game, final week, championship week, Monday night. I'm talking all kinds of smack to everybody. It's a coronation. I'm like playing the parade. I'm taking a day off tomorrow. Like I was really talking a lot. And the other guy had Steve Young. This is how old I am. He had Steve Young and Jerry Rice going, and those two combined for like Rice had almost 300 receiving yards and had like 3 touchdowns, and Steve Young I think accounted for like 6 combined touchdowns rushing and receiving, and they were both at the time like just record-setting performances. And so this guy managed to turn like a 70-point deficit, which was just insurmountable in our scoring system, into a pretty comfortable win with like 2 or 3 guys on Monday night. And I almost called in. I was like, I can't face these guys. like it was. And so like it was losses like that, like week after week, that just made me obsessive. Like I feel like if I'd won that first league, I would have just been like, this is super easy. It's not that interesting. I've already mastered it. Nobody's better than me. And I just would have been like, I would have been in like 1 or 2 leagues, but I became absolutely obsessed because of the sort of variance to the game, right? Like a lot of people don't like that. It's probably my favorite thing about the game, and it's the thing that got me hooked.
That brings us into our second question. You are so good at segueing, even though you don't know the questions. What are the best and worst parts about playing fantasy football for you?
Oh, the best without question are they're social networks, right? So it's, I'm almost embarrassed by the number of friends that I have purely from fantasy leagues and like long-standing fantasy leagues. Like, people that I genuinely love and have now known for decades, I've met entirely through fantasy, right? And awesome. So that to me is the best thing. That's just the absolute best thing. Live drafts, also a great thing. Can't say enough good things about live drafts. The worst, if you're in our role and you actually do our job, is like the basic job description that we have is that it's like our role to take the blame when things go bad for people, and it's all the credit to them when things go right. Like the worst feeling is being wrong on a guy and have like 3 or 4 people reach out to you to point out the fact that you made the wrong call on like Cordero Patterson when he goes off for multiple touchdowns in a game in which he barely freaking plays, right? Like, but that's I never get over that. Like, I know it's coming.
That, Andy, like, come on.
I always brace myself for it. I'm like, by the time he scores the second time, you're like, little ball just waiting, because the tweets are going to come, and then they come and you're like, you're right.
I totally agree with you. Last week, I actually tweeted something. I didn't even say start Alex Collins. I said, I'm in the unfortunate situation where I have to start Alex Collins and Samaje Perine in a league. And of course, he doesn't have a great game. And all these people were like, trash take on Alex Collins. And I'm like, come on, guys. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think I was far from the only person that said he was certainly a good play on Thursday night. I don't think that a lot of us thought that game script would go the way.
I remember tweeting about it on Thursday night, because about Collins specifically, because maybe it's probably my like fatal weakness as a fantasy manager. I I I can't get over sort of the volume chase, right? And if I see a perfect, like, we knew that Alex Collins, and he's coming off a perfectly fine game. He's a fine player. He's an NFL quality running back, but like, man, when I see a guy who I know is just like a replacement level running back, but I think he's going to get 16 touches,
Yeah.
then I start making some wild choices relative to like really good receivers. And I was tweeting about the fact that, man, I'm about to start Alex Collins over, it was over guys like Michael Pittman, who had a great day, and Chase Claypool, who saw a million targets. And like,
Right.
I knew that I was starting Alex Collins over some receivers who were legitimately good players, but I'm just like playing this volume game, and I've never been able to shake that. I've done that my whole fantasy life.
I totally empathize. That may have lost me my league last week. So yeah, pain. All right, jumping into the actual football stuff, we are going to kick it off with a segment called the Burn Book, which is of course a Mean Girls reference. So as fantasy managers, it's so easy to have recency bias, especially if a player has burned us either due to injuries or a bad week. So I'm going to run through 5 players, and I'd like you to briefly tell us how confident you are in that player moving forward, or if they are in your burn book. So I actually did these players before knowing that you were a Bears fan, and there are a number of Bears players in these next 2 segments. So
Oh, no.
I'm even more excited to hear your insight. So the first guy we're going to talk about is Justin Fields. He did post his best game to date for fantasy, tallying 14 points, good enough to finish as QB 17 going into Monday Night Football. It's the first time this year he's finished better than QB 31, which isn't obviously great considering we lauded him as a potential top 12 guy the moment he was going to take over, just because of the rushing. One encouraging thing is that he did see a season high 43 rushing yards. For fantasy purposes, is he like, though, in your burn book, or how do you feel about him moving forward?
Yeah, this is man, I could probably filibuster on this and fill up the rest of the show, so I'll try to not do it. The most vexing thing, I guess, is that they have remained an extremely low volume passing offense. And that, like, Green Bay set up to, in my mind, as a game where like, okay, we're finally going to see Justin Fields throw the ball 30 times. And he almost got there, right? He got to 27, 28, something like that. But they've got some games coming up on this guy. Hey, next week, Tampa Bay, like, we've seen teams literally like get off the bus abandoning the run against Tampa Bay. I mean, Dallas did it, right? Like, the team with Zeke Elliott abandoned the run basically against Tampa. They're just an absolute stonewall defensive front. You're not going to be able to compete in that game if you're just throwing Khalil Herbert into the line 25 times. So if you're going to game plan to the opponent, which, you're supposed to do, they're going to have to throw the ball 35 or 40 times. Like, that's not a big ask against Tampa Bay. They have a clear vulnerability, and they have a clear strength defensively. And you got to play to that. But we're going to find out if the Bears are actually willing to do that, because to this point, Justin Fields hasn't really approached 30 pass attempts in a game. And you pretty much have to be Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson if you're going to overcome like 1970s level pass volume. And that's kind of where we're at with Justin Fields, right? Like, he's clearly a gifted runner, but he still only ran the ball 6 times to get those 43 yards. So this isn't like a Trey Lance situation where, Trey Lance all of a sudden busts out, 16 rush attempts. We're not getting that out of Fields. So either the rushing has to trend upward, like in an extreme way, or they have to actually put the ball in the air 40 times, which is just not even an extraordinary number in the current era, but they haven't been close to doing it. And I mean, that's going to help. That's going to hold everybody back in this offense, except for the running backs. And so I'm just so interested to see if they're willing to do it against Tampa, because again, it's probably the only way to stay within 2 scores of Tampa.
Yeah. Totally understand. I came out of this 16-team salary cap draft with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. It's a 1 quarterback league, but like I thought I was a genius. It had a great complement of quarterbacks, and yeah, obviously I had to start Fields this week because it's also really deep benches. So like there's no one on the waiver wire. Like I don't even know that Davis Mills was on the waiver wire type thing. So like, you're not going to get anyone is my point. So yeah, it was a little tough, though the scoring in my league, it ended up being that he scored like almost 20 points, which was okay. So I'm not going to totally fault him there, and probably need to just make a trade for someone. If I
will say, I feel like I kind of dodged your question in a way. And like, I partially just want to kick it down the road to the Tampa game, because I just want to know what the game plan is. But I will say he had at least one really nice drive. The interception that he threw on Sunday, absolutely not his fault. He thought it's his fault, but he thought he had a free play. There was a Packer offsides, and he just thought he had sort of the classic Aaron Rodgers free play, right? And then they didn't throw the flag, and it became an interception. So I don't even really put that on him. Like, he made a good decision that resulted in an unfortunate outcome. So that wasn't even really bad. He made some nice throws. He's going downfield, unlike Andy Dalton, who was just never going downfield in the first couple of weeks. So there are things I can hang my hat on, and it's just the things that we really thought were positive traits about Justin Fields, the Bears have hardly utilized them, which is weird. It's still a little bit of a coaching failure, but I want to give him this Tampa game before I'm willing to say I'm done with you and I'm moving on.
Yeah, this Tampa game definitely feels like it's like a now or never type thing. Speaking of Tampa, Miles Sanders had a brutal matchup last week, but it's not like he's really sharing work with Kenny Gainwell. Gainwell saw 0 carries all game. Sanders is RB 33, which isn't downright awful, but it's certainly not impressive. How do you feel about Sanders rest of season, or is he in your bird book?
He's probably in that book, I gotta say. Like, these are, and listen, there's nothing you can do about it this week. This is maybe the worst. I don't know. I've already said that I've been playing fantasy for a million years. I can't remember a bye week that's as bad as the one that we're about to hit. It's all these juggernaut offenses that are like 6 teams on bye, and they're all great. And so like half of the top 10 running backs are like on bye this week. It's crazy. So you got to play them. You can't move on from Sanders right now. But I just feel like a good week for him at this moment is a dozen touches, which is just not what we're looking for. Like I don't feel confident discussing him as anything more than a flex. We have the problem in which the quarterback is probably the most gifted runner on the team and is clearly a primary goal line option, right? So it's a little bit of that Josh Allen problem. No matter how much you like the running back, when they get in goal to go situations, it's probably going to be Jalen Hurts. So that's a thing. And he's at least sharing the receiving workload out of the backfield with Gainwell, who sometimes pops and sometimes doesn't, but is clearly a threat and has looked really good. So, and then Sanders is also the sort of player where you're like not totally confident starting him, and he has virtually no trade value. Like, somebody comes to me with a deal for Miles Sanders, I'm like, I'm pass, that's not super interesting to me. It's certainly not going to move the needle for my fantasy team. We might be in a situation where there's somebody in your league who has like both Zeke and Eckler, and you can go to them with Miles Sanders and say, hey, I'm going to help you get through the bye or something like that. And that's how you unload him. But I'm certainly not interested in acquiring him.
Yeah, hopefully, he could have a good week against the Raiders, so certainly wouldn't be the worst guy to start this week. All right, the next guy we're going to talk about is Chris Godwin. It was a weird game where Lenny got 2 touchdowns, and the 2 receiving touchdowns came to Brown and Howard, while Godwin and Evans combined for 70 yards. That is just not how I would have expected those stat lines to play out. He finished as wide receiver 46 with 1 game to play, and his wide receiver 21 on the season, behind Brown and Evans. Are there just simply too many mouths to feed for him to be the elite receiver and reach that potential? How do you feel about him?
Well, we are talking about a passing game where it's become routine for them to throw 4 or 5 touchdown passes, right? And there are a lot of mouths to feed, but the mouths are all great. So we can't really begrudge Tom Brady for, oh, you found Antonio Brown, one of the greatest receivers of any era.
Right.
You know, there's no question that Mike Evans deserves targets, and it's probably going to be a situation where even in a very high yield offense like this, and that's going to go on all season too, right? Because they, you know, the friendly defenses within the division, nobody's really completely put the brakes on them yet. Like, it's just a great team. Godwin's a great player, and he's going to have a handful of spike weeks, but it would be fair to say that we can't think of any of these guys, Brown included, as players who are going to fall into that, like, you know, Stephon Diggs situation last year, where just every week is 8 catches and or a touchdown. Like, it's not going to be like that. Godwin had a quiet week, but he caught every target. You know, he's still one of the absolute best at his position, and at least he's not mired in like the Allen Robinson situation, right? Like, where the volume is always going to be low and all we can hope for is a touchdown. I mean, I just feel like Godwin is going to he's got 3 weeks ahead of him in which he gives us 20 plus fantasy points. Maybe it's more than that. So I'm not particularly worried. Like, you can be disappointed that he wasn't you know, they spun the wheel and it didn't land on Godwin last week, but you can't feel bad about rostering him moving forward.
Yeah, I guess you do have to start him every week, just because of the upside. But here you are segueing us into the next guy. It's like you have the script in front of you. Allen Robinson, yet to score double-digit fantasy points once this year, has fewer targets, receptions, and receiving yards than Darnell Mooney. Are we totally out on A-Rob rest of season? Is he in your burn book? And you can tell me as a fan and as an analyst.
I feel like you've managed to book the one guest who wouldn't say that he's in the book. I still think of Allen Robinson as like a real life top 12, top 15 receiver. I've certainly seen no indication that he's slipping, right? Like, he's not necessarily a guy who wins by, you know, he doesn't win through sheer speed or anything like that. He's not Tyreek Hill. He's just an absolute master of his craft in terms of both route running and utilizing leverage against defensive backs. Like, anytime he's single covered, he's open and the ball should be in the air. I do think it's reasonable to worry that with a player like Fields, who's going to take some time to come along, and like, Fields is adjusting from like what it looks like when a receiver is open at Ohio State to what it looks like when a receiver is open in the NFL. And those are just really different things. Like, at Ohio State, sometimes there's not a defensive back in the camera frame. And in the NFL, there's usually a guy who's like a step away, right? And that's open. And he's got to adjust to that. Fields has made some nice throws to Robinson. Robinson has had a couple of notable drops this year, which is really unfortunate, but we don't really you don't really think of drops as something that are super repeatable for a great player. But dropped passes within the context of an offense that only wants to put the ball in the air 20 to 25 times is kind of a killer. So that's the worry with him. But I don't think he's, you know, Darnell Mooney has caught a couple of touchdowns and he was wide open for a touchdown on Sunday, but they're seeing basically the same volume. I want to say that Robinson had more receiving yards against Green Bay. Not that either one of them had a huge receiving day. But I'm kind of in the same spot with him that I am with Fields, where like, if the game plan doesn't shift in a major way, a profound way against Tampa, then I gotta kind of throw my hands in the air and finally take the L on Robinson and just say, well, it's not going to happen, because this is the one game that just screams you got to throw the ball 40 times. And if they don't, and if I'm looking at the box score after the Tampa game and they've again thrown the ball 24 times and Khalil Herbert has rushed 22 times for 44 yards or something like that, like, then I'll be like, okay, we're done here. I guess he's a drop. But I like, at this point, I still just believe in the talent.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do hope I still have hope that there is an Allen Robinson breakout game in this upcoming. I feel like it's more that the Bears are in my burn book right now and not Allen Robinson as a player.
that I totally understand. Yeah.
So the final guy we're going to talk about is Robert Tunian. So he was the guy that was drafted top 12, scored 2 or fewer points though in 5 of 6 games this year. On one hand, we like having exposure in high scoring offenses and like having guys that are catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. But on the other hand, he doesn't have more than 3 catches all year. Is he droppable to you and totally in your burn book?
Yeah, he is. I would confidently say that he's a potential drop, and that doesn't mean that he's not going to have like a 3 catch, 35-yard, 1 touchdown game, or even several of them coming up at some point. But this volume is too low, right? Like the volume is way too low. We've already seen other tight ends basically emerge as the Robert Tunians of 2021. Like hopefully you got on Dawson Knox, Schultz, and any number of guys, right, that are kind of filling the role in elite offenses that Tunian did last year. We're just not going to get a 50 touchdown season out of Aaron Rodgers. It's not headed that way, right? And that is kind of what propped up Tunian's value last year. I mean, he had so many touchdowns where like you have so many difficult choices to make when you face the Packers passing game, and defenses would just, they lost him, and he had like walk in easy scores. It's just not happening this time around. And I get like Rodgers is great. And of course Rodgers can go off for 4 or 5 passing touchdowns in any given week. But so far this year, it looks more like the I guess I would say like the 2018, 2019 version of Aaron Rodgers, where he's still brilliant and he's still a step ahead of everybody, and he can still put the ball wherever he wants to, but he's not, just nuclear mode where he like every time they get at the 1 yard line, the ball's going in the air, and he wants to finish the season with 48, 50 touchdown passes. And he's just assaulting teams like that. Like it's been 2 touchdowns a week, which is great. He's a wonderful player. He never gives the ball away, but at 2 touchdowns a week, I don't think he can support Robert Tunian.
I agree. He was definitely a guy that I was that I was fading, and he is now in my burn book. So That'll do it for this segment. Our next segment is called a full send or that's cap, which is sort of the opposite of the last one. I'm going to give you 5 players whose values are on the rise, and I want to know, are you sending it on this player or is that cap? So I'm not going to like patronize or anything, but send it's like a ski term when you're like jumping off a cliff. You're like, oh, I'm going full send, I'm gonna throw a backflip or like whatever.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified that. I'm not a winter sports person. Like, you could not get me to fall down a mountain on sticks. It's just not going to happen.
Totally fair. I wanted to make it a little bit ski themed since that's kind of like part of my brand, but so yeah. And then cap obviously is like, that's crap, it's not a real thing. So anyway, our first player is a Kirk Cousins. What I don't get is he has struggled in some easier matchups, see week 5 versus Detroit, but then shows up against Carolina and throws for 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Are you going full send on Cousins as a viable QB1 streamer? And like, if you have him as a manager, like, would you advise managers to hang on to him through his week 7 bye?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point about the bye week ahead, by the way, with all these, like, it's the Chargers, it's the Bills, it's the Vikings, it's the Steelers. Who am I leaving out? Dallas, Jacksonville. Like, it's all these good players, all these good quarterbacks. There's actually going to be like a handful of leagues where, I think Kirk Cousins is probably 80% rostered, 75% rostered at Yahoo, but like people are going to drop him because it's such a difficult week. I'm full send on him. And like, he obviously has had his issues over the years, but he's tied to such good receivers, and he is playing so well right now. And I'm sure at some point we're going to get the random, Kirk trap game where he coughs up a dud again in a matchup that seems perfect. Like that's happened throughout his career. But his best games are all going to be like 335 yards and 3 touchdowns. I feel a high degree of confidence in Kirk Cousins. They're also, it's not, this isn't a dominant defense. And so there have been points in the past where it really feels like the Vikings, if they could, would just throw the ball 22 times and they'd lean on Dalvin Cook and a good defense. And I just don't think that's the identity of this team. Like, I think the identity of this team is that, Thielen is still great, and Justin Jefferson is an ascending star, and Kirk Cousins is a veteran who is just at that perfect point of experience and like he's seen everything there is to see. He still has all the physical tools that he's ever had. And he's probably going to deliver one of his best seasons as long as he stays healthy. So any given week, any given opponent, 335, 350, and 3 touchdowns is definitely on the table for Kirk. So I'm holding him.
That is great to know. KJ Osborne popped off on my bench, so at least I have him. But yeah, certainly interesting to see how he performs in like different matchups, because like I said, he definitely will put up like a really bad game against a bad defense, and it's pretty head scratching. But anyway, the next guy we're going to talk about, another Bear, is Darnell Mooney. So as mentioned before, he's got more. He's doing better than Allen Robinson in pretty much every category, though their volume is very similar. And he will finish as a top 24 receiver for the second time this year for this week. Are we going full send on Mooney as the wide receiver 1 in this offense? And is he a viable starter for fantasy? Because he is, I don't want to say widely available, but he's under 50%.
You know what? He's weirdly available. Yes. And I write the pickups column for Yahoo each week, and I almost left him out because I didn't even check his roster percentage, because why would he only be rostered in 44% of leagues? It seems strange. That's obviously going to change because there's like a dozen, wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s on bye this week. So he's going to get scooped up everywhere. I'm not with the people who are suggesting that he is the Bears' clear wide receiver 1. That's just that's not in the target totals. He's made some wonderful plays. Like everybody had him as a sleeper coming into this year because he was like his timed speed just absolutely translated to the field last year. The Bears couldn't really make it happen for him because the line couldn't block for any of these deep routes that he was running, but he was smoking guys all year. Like he was obviously great last season, and it's come to fruition a little bit this year. We're seeing more of it, but his targets aren't fundamentally different from Robinson's. Robinson is still highly skilled. Like Mooney's going to have a bunch of good weeks though. Like the one nice thing I guess we could say about the Bears passing game is that it's not like they're throwing the ball to 9 different guys. Most of the targets are still being funneled to like a running back and these 2 receivers. And so, but we're also sort of talking about like which guy is going to score the Bears' lone offensive touchdown. That's what we're getting into. So yeah, and it's obviously that's been Mooney more often than it's been Robinson, I guess. But I don't. To Mooney's credit, I think he's put himself in the conversation. Like Robinson is moving one way and Mooney is moving the other, right? Like I get it, but I feel like they've just kind of arrived at the same place. It's not like week in, week out, I'm just expecting Mooney to outproduce Robinson because again, the volume is super similar.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really have a lot of hope for him because, as you mentioned, he was a very popular sleeper, one of the sleepers that I talked about a lot, and I have him on a lot of benches. So hopefully he does see a little bit more volume moving forward if this passing offense can kind of get it going. All right, the next guy we're going to talk about is Darrell Williams. Who is the best Chiefs running back, and why is it Darrell Williams right now? I don't understand it. He showed up this week, RB5 and half PPR with 1 game to play, 24 touches for 89 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns, while Jerick McKinnon saw 4 touches for 15 yards. I know this is recency bias and CEH is on IR, but are we going full send on Williams even once CEH comes back?
Yeah, well, that's the real question. The Chiefs have already shown us that they are somewhat less than satisfied with CEH, right? Because they're the guys who invited Le'Veon Bell into the building last year. That didn't need to happen. And I think Edwards-Helaire is fine. And I think he hasn't become quite the back that I thought he would coming into the league. Like I was super excited about that draft pick, both because of system and player. He does have back-to-back 100-yard games this season. It's not like he was playing poorly, but I feel like Darrell Williams is going to be, if not 50% of the backfield work, it's going to be, he's certainly going to occupy, I would think, the share that they had intended to give Bell a year ago, right? And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's 40%. I don't know if it's 45. I don't know if it's 50. But he's good, and he's good in goal to go situations as well, which is, not that touchdown scoring is some super predictable thing, but obviously we've seen CEH stonewalled at the goal line a handful of times. And Williams is just really good and decisive there. And he's a strong, decisive runner. I don't think he's exceptional necessarily, but it's not like I think Edwards-Helaire is exceptional in any particular area. There's at some point we're going to see CEH really, I would hope, emerge as I think there's another level that he can reach as a pass catcher that I thought he was ready to go as a rookie. Like I thought that was going to happen as a rookie. It didn't happen. I still think he's got a level to go there. I feel like he and Williams can be really not, they can complement each other really well. But yeah, I guess I'm, if not full send, I'm partial send on, if that's probably not a ski term. I don't know. Probably don't want a partial send. You've probably injured yourself. Partial send.
Fine. Yeah, no,
but,
I get it.
I think this value is gonna hold. Not, he's not gonna be 2 touchdown, 20 touch Darrell Williams, but as a pretty bankable flex where he's going to give you 10 to 12 touches, I think that's very much in play.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm there yet that I think he's going to necessarily be like a viable fantasy asset rest of season, but I think he's going to be getting enough volume that it's going to make a headache for CEH managers. So I think that's kind of really the takeaway from this. And I would be very concerned if I had CEH on my roster at this point. So another guy that had a great game, we already kind of talked about him, Leonard Fournette, stole the show with 22 carries for 81 yards, 2 touchdowns, caught all 6 targets for 46 yards, tallying more receiving yards than Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I'm still a little salty about that, but I want to keep fading him given Bruce Arians' mercurial nature with running backs, but it's getting to the point that I can't do it anymore. So are you going full send on Fournette rest of season as a high-end RB2, low-end RB1 rest of season, or is it kind of cap?
Yeah, no, I think I am. I think I am going full send because this is consecutive weeks now. This isn't the situation we had last year where we were just like a week behind constantly, right? We were guessing wrong all the time. Just as soon as we thought it was, Leonard Fournette's backfield, Ronald Jones would get a start and take the first 3 series or whatever. And Jones has just been sort of a supporting, cameo role player lately, and Fournette's been good. I kind of hoped coming into the season that they would use Fournette's just incredible playoff performance as a catapult to just sort of make him the main guy, because obviously if one guy falls into 80% of the touches in this backfield, that guy's a star, and right now that's Fournette, and he's not going to be. I don't think he's going to be a player who gives us a touchdown or 2 each week. It's not going to go like that, because the passing game is definitely their strength. And I don't want to oversell him as some sort of rare and special talent. He's good. He's certainly good enough to occupy the lead role in this job. And man, the lead role in the Tampa backfield is a big deal. That's an offense that's going to end up averaging 30 to 35 points a game, and so we want that. And he's just done nothing to lose his grip on that. And it sure looks like Gio Bernard is going to be a rotational guy, and Ronald Jones is going to be a rotational guy, and Fournette's going to take all the work he can handle.
I just know the moment that I start trusting in Leonard Fournette, it's the Ronald Jones game. So no, I do hope that he is the playoff Lenny is what we're going to see from now on. All right, the last guy we're going to talk about is Mike Kasichi. It has been quite a roller coaster of a season. He looked borderline droppable after 2 weeks. Bagel didn't week 1. Then had 2 straight 14-point fantasy games in half PPR. Struggled in week 5 in a positive matchup, but then had a monster 8-catch, 115-yard game in week 6. Will likely finish as a top 3 tight end. I get it. The position's a nightmare. There is no other way to put it. But are we trusting him? Are we going full send on him moving forward?
It seems wrong to go full send. So no, I'm one of I do have a league in which I dropped Kasichi after I think week 2. I'm not regretting it because it was for Dawson Knox, and that's worked out totally fine. Totally. Right. So I feel pretty good about that. I wasn't chasing after like Max Williams or anything like that. So it went fine. Fine. But I also just feel like part of this is, Parker out, Fuller out, it's not the receiving core that they expected to have. So a lot of stuff was going to tight ends. On the other hand, oftentimes when Tua is looking deep, it doesn't go well. Like he just missed a bunch of throws. I mean, it's great to see him back. Had a
Mhm.
had a decent enough fantasy day, but he really threw some ugly balls. Kasichi is also someone who perhaps not so much this year. Last year, I mean, there were still moments where like well thrown passes were hitting him in the face and falling to the ground. Right, like he's not perfect. And so I just don't feel like week to week he's going to be particularly consistent. I also don't feel like this is the sort of offense, like, you know, I don't like to I shouldn't compare him to Dawson Knox in any way, but like the Bills are just going to put 35 on anybody.
Mhm.
And it's been I mean, I almost swore there. I don't know if I can swear on the show, but
You
like
can swear.
it's been quite a season for Miami, and they're just going to have a whole bunch of other games in which they, you know, it's like the Bears situation where like there's going to be a bunch of
Yeah.
matchups where you're just hoping that whichever Dolphin you start, you're getting their lone offensive touchdown, and I mean that's just not going to go to Gesicki very often. So is he somebody who's probably going to finish as like the tight end 11 or 9 or something like that, and we'll look at the year-end fantasy ranks and say, oh well, he was a top tight, he was a tight end 1, but he's not playing that way necessarily. He
Mhm.
also had one of my like low-key favorite highlights of the week, where he tried to hurdle a guy and only got like, I don't know, 2.5 feet off the ground and basically just jumped into his arms. I like this was one of my favorite things that I saw. I mean, I love it when hurdles go wrong. I love it when they go horribly wrong, and I love it when they just end in a hilarious visual like that.
Yeah, that is hilarious. As often as the Chiefs and Bills are going to put up like 40 points, I think that same frequency, like that same probability is there for the Dolphins to put up like 13 points, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're totally right that this offense is more concerning than necessarily Gesicki as a player. All right, Annie, we have 8 more rapid fire questions. So let's just get this all done. Name one player you just can't quit or always find yourself making excuses for. So for me, that is Joe Mixon as the player, not the person. But he's just like the guy that I'm always like, it's Mixon season. I can't move on from him. And you know what? Whatever. He's doing well right now. So I'll just keep rolling with it.
Well, I mean, after all that I've said about Allen Robinson, I would be an absolute fraud here if I didn't say Allen Robinson, because I've already made, I don't know, 10 excuses for him on the podcast so far. So I feel like I've already painted myself into a corner there. I do just want to say that like I agree with everything you said on Mixon, and Mixon is one of those guys where even when he didn't look like the most efficient runner a handful of years ago, the way I've always liked to put it is that it seemed like a staple of Cincinnati's offense for a couple of years there was just to put Joe Mixon in impossible situations well behind the line of scrimmage and see if he could wriggle his way to 2 or 3 yards, and he would. And like just a miracle worker sometimes with like just bad numbers behind the line of scrimmage. He's really good. Like he's really good. He's in that upper, just as a pure rushing talent. I feel like Joe Mixon, prime Joe Mixon, he's been dinged obviously a little bit lately, but Joe Mixon at his best is in that upper tier of just pure rushers. And so he's a guy that I always seem to go back to, but obviously I have to say Robinson here because I've now made 19 excuses for him.
I feel so vindicated. So you're now my favorite person. Predict when the Bears will win their next Super Bowl.
Oh no.
Actually, I've had a lot of Bears fans too on this podcast, maybe like 3 already, and it's been interesting range of responses. So I'd like to hear.
Yeah, but you know, I just feel like there's such a transformation ahead, both in the division and with that team. It's almost certainly not going to be with Pace and Nagy in key roles, decision-making roles with the team, right? So I feel like we have to get to a new regime. I feel like Aaron Rodgers needs to leave the division, which, hey, that may happen as soon as next year. Like that's on the table. That's, as a Bears fan, I'm probably looking forward to Aaron Rodgers moving on to his next team more than I'm looking forward to almost anything. So that needs to happen as well. I also kind of feel like the Lions are going to be a little frisky in the division. They have been so far, but that's a separate concern. So I feel like we need to get to a new coaching staff, and somebody else needs to rebuild the roster. And it probably all happens without Allen Robinson. So this is all a way of saying that I don't think it can happen in the next 3 years. So maybe we're talking, but I do feel like Justin Fields can be part of it. I think he's got a huge arm. I think he has clear elite traits. And once you find a quarterback like that, you've got to do everything you can to create a great developmental environment for him. You've got to make him happy at all costs. You've got to put a receiving core around him and an offensive line ahead of him and all that stuff. And like, if they do that, then I guess I feel like maybe the year is 2026, 2027, something like that. Like, it's totally in play. I'm a big believer in Justin Fields long-term.
Love to see it. I definitely had a number of Bears fans say 2023. So they are very, very all in on Fields and all in on him making that leap very quickly. So hopefully we see that overhaul of Nagy and Pace sooner rather than later. All right. I don't actually know Damian Williams' status right now, but assuming he plays next week, and I don't know if that's a fair assumption, who has more points in fantasy, him or Khalil Herbert?
It's a good question, and it could be one of those situations where the right answer is you don't want to play either one of them. I do think Williams is the better receiver. I think he has a real gift for creating throwing lanes for his quarterback. I don't know that that's going to matter a ton with Justin Fields ultimately, but I do feel like he's a better receiver. Khalil Herbert's been very impressive, but it's just a killer matchup against Tampa. And again, not to belabor that point, but like, if the Bears don't go into this thing thinking that they have to throw the ball 40 times, I don't know what they've scouted. Like, you're just not going to be able to plow into the Tampa defensive front and pile up points and yards. It's just not going to happen. So if Williams plays, I would say I'm going to have him ranked a little bit higher.
Fair enough. I mean, Khalil Herbert definitely saved one of my teams this week, but yes, it will make things a little muddier once Williams returns. Was Joe Flacco ever elite? Yes or no?
For 6 games, 5 games, 6 games at the most critical time in real life in a season. Yeah, he played out of his mind. He was phenomenal, and he beat great defenses, and he beat dynasties, and then whatever deal he made with the devil expired, and then he was Joe Flacco again. but like for a month and a half, I mean, and hey, he did it again. Like, if you're only going to have like a month and a half out of your career where you are a master of your craft in the NFL, man, do it as a quarterback in December and January. He was phenomenal.
Absolutely. Will any Bears player finish at the top 5 in their respective position for fantasy?
If anyone does it, it's going to be Santos. It's not. I mean, it's off the table for David Montgomery with the injury now. It's clearly not going to happen for Justin Fields because he's given up too much ground to the rest of the league, and there's no path for Robinson and Mooney at this point. I've been thinking that if Robinson can even get to like 900 or 1,000 receiving yards, like say that everything gets a little bit better in the second half and Robinson has some games, man, if Allen Robinson has like 1,000 receiving yard season, given this team context, that is like, send him straight to Canton. It's over. Like, he'll have had 1,000 yards with Bortles and Trubisky and Foles and then rookie Justin. I mean, just an incredible run, but he's got a lot of work to do.
Here you are making more excuses for Allen Robinson.
Yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right.
I love it. No, who should managers' top waiver ad be this week?
Man, it's so contextual, especially this week, because again, it's just such a nightmare out there. So maybe I'll just go position by position. I feel like a lot of people are going to be and I'm going to use the threshold that I always do for the pickups columns, which is like 50% rostered, under 50% rostered. So obviously, if you're in a league where like
mine's here, so
yeah, there's a handful of leagues where like, I feel like Michael Carter is like 53% rostered at Yahoo right now. He would obviously be a better ad than a lot of the other people that we wrote about. and this is all, like we're doing this on a Monday afternoon, so I don't know what like Antonio Gibson's status is going to be, but he obviously spent a lot of time on the sideline with the recurring shin issue. So that could change things. That could make me feel like JD McKissick, and to a lesser degree perhaps Patterson, who was just a phenomenally productive college runner, that they could really bump to the top of the list. Ramondre Stevenson is an interesting spec. I'm giving you like 15 names when you ask for one. That's terrible. Ramondre Stevenson is an interesting name, but I don't think he's going to creep to the top of that backfield hierarchy anytime soon. So it's probably, yeah, that's a boring answer, but it's probably McKissick for me at running back. It's close. Like other people are going to prioritize Dearness Johnson, which I get because Hunt is out and Chubb is probably out, but it's a Thursday game, and I don't think he's a particularly special player, and Felton's going to get looks too. So like that's just a minefield. Like running back is a minefield. At receiver, if they're available, I would take either one of the Cardinals guys, right? Like AJ Green and Christian Kirk are both like 45% rostered right now, but that also feels like cheating because they're gone in virtually all of my leagues. I don't know where these leagues are where like Cardinals receivers are just sitting out there for you. Mooney is right behind them, also around 44-45%. Among guys who are widely available, the one name that I just keep pounding the table for is Tim Patrick. And he's not, like Tim Patrick doesn't give us like the 3 touchdown, 150-yard game. If he ever did, then he would be rostered everywhere. But what he does do, like a lot of fantasy managers claim that they really value consistency, and yet they leave this guy out there. He has 80 receiving yards or a touchdown in 5 of 6 games this season. Like he is very steadily a double-digit point producer, and that's going to matter a lot as we get into these, like especially these super messy bye weeks. So I like Patrick a whole lot at receiver. I just think he's a guy you can plug and play and basically always count on wide receiver 3 numbers.
Man, I love Patrick. He's been a guy since last season. I've just perennially put in my waiver columns, and I was on Fantasy Pros live stream with Dan Harris, and our silly theory is that if he had a more exciting name, he sounds like an accountant with Tim Patrick. Yeah. So we were like, if we gave him a name to Brickashaw Ferguson or something, he would be rostered in every league. So that is my Tim Patrick story. Give me one player who you think is primed for a big fantasy season next year.
Oh, that's a good question. It's easy to pick one of the quarterbacks. The Niners got to move on to Trey Lance at some point. And we've already seen that they're willing to let him run the ball like 15 times in a game, which is really something that only, like literally Lamar Jackson and like Bobby Douglas are the only 2 guys that have done that over the last 50 years. Like quarterbacks just don't run the ball that often. So Trey Lance is probably the guy if you're a dynasty manager, maybe you're a 1-win team right now, 2-win team, and you're not feeling too good about your chances. I really like Trey Lance as somebody who's going to pop next year for us. I guess I'd throw Rashad Bateman in there too. I'm a big believer. I realized that he had a pass bounce off his chest that became an interception in his first game back this year, but I just think he has a skill set that complements everybody else in that Ravens receiving core. And he's like it's like they have a Rashad Bateman shaped hole in their receiving core, and they have the perfect guy to fill it now. So I think by the back half of this season, he's going to have some really good weeks. And I think he's got a real chance to be, if not that team's wide receiver 1, like kind of a 1A with Brown next year. I think he's really exciting too.
I love that. I have all the faith in Trey Lance. So hopefully his kind of lackluster performances for fantasy didn't deter too many managers. 2 more questions. How many attempts would it take you to make an extra point?
Oh, wow. Also a good question. And I've tried it.
Okay. I have never tried it. So like, if I had to answer that, I'd probably say like 100. I don't know.
Yeah, I've gone out and tried it, and I can make it in not in like a, wow, soaring through the uprights kind of way, but I can make it in a doink off the crossbar or, like how did it come off of his foot spinning that way? How would that even, like I can make it that way, like 1 out of like 10 times. Right. And it'll a little better than that. but like maybe it's like 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7, something like that. Like I was kicking them through. It looked horrible, and they would all. The other thing is they would probably all get blocked, right? Like I'm sure I was kicking it too low. I was doing a million things wrong. I was taking, too many steps, all of that. So in an actual game with actual people trying to block it, is that what we're saying?
Oh no, just no, because that's almost just not fair.
Under game conditions, I think I couldn't do it. I would mess that up. Like just nobody in my way. Yeah, I could do it 10 or 12% of the time. It's way harder than it looks.
Oh, I bet. And hey, the line drive counts. So it doesn't need to look pretty. That is way more impressive than me. Finally, if you had one cardinal rule to share with someone just getting into fantasy this year, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a good question. And I guess I would say if it's somebody who's just getting into fantasy, you want to make sure that you have fun with it, right? Like, so you want everybody else who's in the, like, have a notion for who these other people are that you're getting in a league with, right? Like, you want it to be like kind of a fun social network, because all of my favorite leagues are that they're good friends, and I've cultivated friendships over the years with people in the league. So you want it to have that kind of vibe, because over time, I'm sure you would agree, almost anybody who plays fantasy would agree, it just makes us so much better informed as sports fans. Like I'm such a more knowledgeable, even if I didn't go into like writing fantasy and talking fantasy, I would just, I mean, the expansion of your own sports knowledge from playing fantasy is just so great. Like I want people to stick with it. So like, find a group that you're going to have fun with, because you're not going to be dominant every season. You're going to make draft mistakes. Guys are going to get hurt. You're going to draft good. People drafted Dak Prescott last year, and it was a great process, and he got hurt, and then they lost their league. Like you're just not always going to win. But you got to be in a group in which you're really going to have fun, and you really want to engage with people.
I think a lot of more people on Twitter, analysts, whatever, need to remember that, because it's not like the echo chamber, the negativity that we get on Twitter. Like that's not how most people are experiencing fantasy, and it should be fun. And I know there's lots of money. All that stuff is legit, but fun should come first, because it is a game. So
all that stuff is like 2% of the fantasy world too. Like most fantasy leagues, like the great majority, the overwhelming majority of fantasy leagues and fantasy players, number one, they're not following experts on Twitter, right? Like for the most part, Twitter fantasy, we're all just talking to ourselves. And there's a handful of players that are listening, but the great majority of fantasy leagues, they're not checking in 5 times a day. They're casual players who just like interacting with each other.
Hard agree. All right, that will do it for this round of 21 questions with our esteemed guest, Andy Behrens. Andy, I can't thank you enough for joining me during this insanely busy time. Please tell everyone where they can find you this NFL season.
Yeah, please. It was super fun. It was. This was great. This is a really good time. I'm on Twitter. I'm just at Andy Behrens, and they can always find me at Yahoo Fantasy, where there's a good chance they have a league or two, so they might see me already.
Nice. Well, I love the Sunday show and everything, and keep doing great work. As a reminder, Sean Kerner and Chris Raybon are here on the Fantasy Flex every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, giving you guys all the DFS, waiver wire, and rankings info to help you dominate your fantasy leagues. I will be back this Thursday and every Thursday from now on with my mailbag episodes, speaking of which you should email mailbag questions to mailbag@actionnetwork.com. Thanks again for listening. Please rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts. Download us wherever you like to listen, and we will see you next time on the Fantasy Flex presented by Prize Picks. Peace out, y'all.